Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I am your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by my co-host, Seth Wilson. Seth, how's it going today?
Thomas, I'm doing great. We've got some beautiful sunshine outside, and I think that just brings that energy and rejuvenation, if you will, of we're getting through some of the cold, and it's fun to be outside again and start to see little bits of green here and there as we get ready
That's
for
right.
St. Patrick's Day.
It's time to get the bikes out, go for a walk, enjoy the fresh springtime weather. We certainly have had a nice week here in the central Indiana area. I think it's going to get a little bit stormy here this weekend, but overall, it's been a really, really nice week.
Yeah, and it just reminds me as we were prepping for today's call and thinking through the law firm life cycle, right? Like we go through these seasons and we see that kind of everything has its season, especially if you live in the Midwest like we do, where we see the cycles of things happen. And so I think we see that often in a law firm as well, kind of those repeatable patterns that show up over time. And what I sort of think about this as you practice those things, those repetitions, they get better and more streamlined as time goes on. So I've kind of developed a little bit of what I call that law firm life cycle. We thought it might be good to talk through that and how we use that in the practice here and give you a chance to poke some holes in, where I might be missing something.
Well, you're the one that teaches me on so much when it comes to law office management. But yeah, I think it's great to kind of analyze the kind of the timeline, the life cycle of a case and how you get from point A to point B to point C to D to close. And yeah, systems are really important. You mentioned these things get better and improve. The only thing I would add to that is, as we kind of talk through this, it'll improve if you make it improve. You'll have opportunities for it to improve, but if you don't make the effort, you're going to be running into the same problem over and over and over again. Taking a look at the life cycle of a case, life cycle of a law office, it'll kind of give you a big picture of how a law office runs and then areas where you can make improvement in your law practice.
Yeah, and it's so the analogy is great because even across sort of the bigger picture of how things move in and through your office in totality, then on a more focused level or a smaller level, you can see, as you mentioned, how a particular case might have a cycle and how it works and what do you do with that. And I know that's one thing lawyers traditionally have sort of struggled with, if you will, is there's always seemingly more to do than can get done. And so when you're done with a case, what do you do with that? Do you have a good policy and procedure for moving that out of the active files and into an archive file? What's the retention policy in that? So each of these, as we talk about them, we can kind of go through, and probably some will warrant more discussion than others over time. But let me actually share a visual of this that just kind of helps me think about it. And, keep in mind, I'm not really a graphic artist. So this is a rough draft attempt of kind of
Yeah,
visualizing what we're talking about. But I
yeah,
kind of
you were showing this to me a little bit earlier, and these are things that we've talked about in the past, whether on the podcast or off air. But kind of walk us through this, maybe overall first, and then we'll hit the highlights with each phase as you after you go through it for the first time.
Yeah, it sounds great. So basically, just kind of I think about this in a cycle, right? So a little bit like a clock. And if we start up here at phase one, I call this the connections phase. We sort of organize each of our areas of things in our office around words that start with the letter C. So this could be marketing or lead generation or anything like that, but we call it connections because we're trying to build connections and relationships with people that then would lead into a consult potentially down the road. Doesn't have to, but that's kind of the concept. Sorry, didn't mean to throw another C in there. And then phase two, as we kind of follow the clockwork here, this is what happens when we have a client consult. right? So this could also be called connection or lead management. And we've talked about that in the past in terms of specific software tools that we use. We happen to use Clio Grow here in the office for that, but making sure that when we have that connection with a client, then we turned it into a consult to try to answer questions that we can. And potentially, if that consult goes well, this individual or those individuals may become clients. And so that moves us into phase three. When a client becomes a client, they have matters in the legal world, we call them, but we use the phrase cases. And so this may generate, one case or may generate multiple cases depending on sort of the complexity of the client scenario. But that's phase three. So how do we manage this? And you alluded to this a couple minutes ago in terms of each case then may have its own life cycle that it goes through. And so each of these areas has a lot of detail behind it. But I'm always trying to think of things in terms of where they fall in the cycle. And so at each juncture or handoff, I want to make sure that I have some consistency around how we're handling that. And so as I look at the cases and the matters, that flows into the actual cash that runs the business. And then what I want to do when that case is concluded is kind of come through our last phase, which is phase four, that conclusion. What do we do with that? What did we learn from that case? How can we develop better things through checklists or other items to be more consistent in the delivery of what we're doing at phase four, which then we can apply to the next connection that comes in. And so that's kind of the overview of that law firm cycle or life cycle. Obviously, surrounded the core of the wheel, if you will, is these are our core values. These may tie into our mission statement. And we talked about this a little bit, I think, on a previous podcast of the why of the practice. What gets you out of bed every morning to come do the work that you've been called to do.
Yeah, I love how you broke that down, and maybe that's the best place to start in the cycle of a law office is understanding what your mission is. What are your core values? And what I would say for my law firm is I want to be a pillar in the community. I want to be a resource to those that are in the community that have questions, that have legal problems. I want to be the guy that people talk to and receive dependable advice. So that's one of my core values is being a resource to the community. Faith is a part of that. Family is a part of that. Not just client oriented, but also with employees. You want to make sure that everybody enjoys coming to work every day. And it's a good environment in which to be employed. Understanding what your core values are is going to kind of fuel the passion for how your law office is going to be run overall.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it. And I think what it does for me is in the midst of the busyness of practice, it helps keep you focused on those things that are important and that that in spite of everything that's going on, it's going to be okay. And we're going to get through this because we have all of these tools in place to help us in those times of stress. And I think that's one thing that I've learned over the years is especially as we kind of look at this after action review over in phase four, where you talk about what are the things that helped us identify when our system was best in its time of stress. And what do we need to adjust because maybe something didn't quite work as well when we needed it most. And as an example of that, the cycle that I have on the screen here is I used to have, I think, 6 different phases. And I realized that's too much for people to process. And you can't really remember it. It was always like, well, was that phase 1 or 2 or now we're in 3? So I really worked to say, how can we really simplify this and give everybody some clear boundaries around that particular phase. And then obviously we have folks who are primarily responsible for the different phases and how this works. And so each individual has some more clarity about now what they're expected to do. and where the handoff points are to the next person in the process, so to speak. And so we found that to be very helpful. But as you refine your system, whatever that ends up being, and that's kind of the beauty of starting your own firm, is you get to identify what these core values are and how you want to operate your practice. And hopefully this can give you just some ideas. Again, this isn't a like, hey, do this and this will work for everybody at all times. This is just a system that we have found helpful to kind of organize our thoughts around the law firm lifecycle.
I do have a question about one of the core values on there. Fail is one of the core values. I want you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so those actually fail and fix go together pretty quickly. So the concept is fail fast and fix it. So we're going to move quickly as we can to serve folks, and sometimes that's going to result in something not working correctly. There will be a failure. But if you can fix it quickly, it's going to be okay. And most of the time, we're ahead of the game enough to say, yeah, we need to fix that. And we can do so because we've done a good job of having the systems in place. There's just a reality in life. You're never going to please everybody. And there's going to be times when you drop the ball. And if you've done that, you better fix it quick, right? You've got to apologize. You got to make it right and do everything you can to fix that. And sometimes you can't. And that's a hard day where a client decides that you aren't the right fit. And something happened and the relationship changed. And obviously that's not the goal, but it does happen. And I think that's one thing every lawyer has to wrestle with, is getting fired by a client. And that's not a good day, and that can shake your confidence, especially if you're a younger lawyer and it's the first time it's happened to you. But that's kind of the idea, especially too from a staff standpoint. We want to give our team permission to fail, not that we seek failure, we seek excellence, right? But to recognize that no one's perfect, least of all me, right? So I want to work through those things quickly and make sure that we're focused on the fixing of the failure, not the failure itself.
Yeah, I think that is where we're definitely aligned when it comes to making mistakes and then trying to fix them as soon as possible. If it was my fault or my staff's fault that made the mistake, then let's apologize, let's correct it, and make sure that the client understands that we're going the extra mile to make sure that we're making things right. And that's one unique thing about being an attorney. It's really why law practice is law practice. We don't have all the answers all the time. We make mistakes from time to time, but you can go back and correct your mistake and get back on the horse, so to speak. So I think that's a great core value. There's some, it's not an F word, but humility is, maybe a way to describe that fail and fix part of the core values that you've got there. So, and I think humility is important to have as a business owner, whether it's a law practice or any other kind of business. Humility and understanding that you don't know everything, but you understand what you don't know, and you do what you can with what you have. So yeah, I thought that was great. Anything else you wanted to talk about as far as the core values are concerned?
No, we could obviously go into more detail about our specific alignment here, but that's going to be so dependent on who you are and what you want to do. Clearly, there'll be some overlap. You mentioned the community involvement and those kind of things. That's where fellows come in. That's fellowship or something like that with your community and being part of what's going on. And so you're going to have those things. You may just structure them a little bit differently so that they resonate with you and help motivate your team or your office in the midst of those things. And so I think it's just the concept is really important and understanding the why of what you do. And then again, we'll talk through maybe more strategically how we particularly handle for our office the connections piece, right? What do we do? What are we involved in? What have we found that works well? Maybe doesn't work well. what do we not know that works, right? Like we always joke, the old adage is half of what you do from a marketing perspective works. You just don't know which half. And so you're kind of afraid to stop doing any of it. But, what are those things that you can do? What kind of filters can you put in place so that with the time that you have available, you're getting the maximum return on investment?
Yeah, connections are so important to law practice. I remember, when I first started, all that I had was time to make connections. And it seems like, looking back on it, I've been in practice for, you know, over 10 years now. It seems like every conversation that I've had has had some kind of impact down the line. It might be 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, but folks that I talked to a long time ago, they occasionally call, or maybe my name is mentioned by somebody that I met at a networking breakfast. No marketing effort has really gone, unnoticed or hasn't had any effect. And so just making connections is really important. One of the things that I've learned along the way is that you can never stop marketing. You can never stop making connections. And the minute that you stop doing that and you feel like you can rest on your laurels is the time that your your pipeline is going to dry up and you're not going to have that next case to go to after you finish one case.
And it's counterintuitive because the time to market is at the time when you're the busiest. So you're tempted to not continue whatever those efforts that got you there. But I think, again, not to beat the C words to death, but that consistency, it really helps to be consistent over time and be putting the effort in to build those connections. And that's so important even in the midst of a busy season, because I find that I'll get an invitation to attend an event or be part of a sponsorship, and my brain just goes, I just don't know that I can handle one more thing right now. There's so many other things competing for my time. Is this the right thing to do? And so in those moments, I have to look back and say, okay, does this align with our core? Is this part of who we are? Is this a good community investment? Is this, and start thinking those things through. I think we talked about this earlier on the podcast this year. I apologize if this is a duplication, but at the beginning of the year, I had a goal of giving a certain number of CLEs and no more, right? So in the lawyer world, CLEs are required by lawyers each cycle. We have a 3-year cycle. We have so many hours in Indiana that we have to get. And I've presented at a number of CLEs over the years and had the privilege of doing that. And I keep getting invited to do more CLE presentations. And I kind of go, well, wait a minute. I need to pay attention to that, because if I'm getting that honor, if you will, bestowed on me, it would be foolish to ignore that and not lean into that just because I came up with an artificial number of what I should do this year. So I kind of flipped it and said, well, let's see how many I can do instead of let's limit what we're doing. And so it's been a mindset shift for me, because in the busyness, you think, well, I don't need to do as much of that. But you're not doing it for the activity, you're doing it to build the connections. And that can only help in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure that you're going to see that pay off, whether it's this year or next year. You've been talking to me about all the CLEs that you've been preparing for, and a lot of what you've been talking about is artificial intelligence, and that's like the hot topic of the year. To be a speaker on that topic is going to pay off for you down the road. I'm confident of that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm just really concerned that people are going to find out that my intelligence is only artificial.
Yeah, well,
When the truth gets out, you heard it here first, so to speak.
that's right. That's right.
No, it's such an honor to be asked, and I take that very seriously. And I think one of the things that you find as an attorney is there are certain things that only you can do and do the way you do them. And if somebody thought enough of you to ask you to do that, I try to pay attention to that and say, okay, if that is valuable to you for whatever reason, right? Maybe you're on a committee and you need somebody to fill in. I've had situations where I filled in for someone who wasn't able to be there on short notice, those kind of things. So to honor the person who is asking you, builds that connection and shows that respect for that person, and just having the opportunity then. And I always feel the pressure of doing a good job, right? You want to make sure that you're not overcommitted so that you're not actually delivering on what you were supposed to deliver on. So those are the things that always counterbalance as I'm looking at, okay, yeah, you could take all of these things and do them, but can you do them well, right? And keep in keeping with the excellence that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So phase one, connections. If you could pull that screen back up here.
Absolutely.
Phase two is consults. And connections naturally flow into consults, a conversation, an email, a referral. Those lead into consults. And that's really where the law office part kind of starts to hit a little bit. You're going to start a file. You're going to open up a matter in hopefully some kind of management program that you have, so you can keep tabs on who might be a prospective client and all that kind of stuff. So talk a little bit about phase two here.
Yeah, it's like you and I were talking about a couple of weeks ago, where we have those conversations with people out and about, and you don't want to lose track of them. So you have that system in place to capture those leads and make sure that you are delivering on, yeah, let's sit down and talk about that. Let me answer the questions I can for you and those kind of things. And so this is that part of the process that allows you confidence that you are going to be a person of your word and maintain your integrity and say, yeah, we have somebody from the office reaching out to you to set up an appointment, a phone call, a Zoom meeting, or what have you, to discuss what's going on. And so that's really what this piece is so we don't lose track of those potential conversations, and make sure that we're looking at it. Not, again, the goal is not to turn them into clients. It's not a conversion rate that I'm really looking at. It's, I want to provide that comfort to folks and make sure that they're understanding that if I said we would have that conversation and that's helpful to you, I want to make sure I'm delivering on that and not dropping the ball.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do when I'm talking to somebody in the community and they have a question, I either set a calendar event in my calendar so that that's a reminder that I need to follow up with somebody, or I might, you know, use my phone to set a task for myself. I need to follow up, but some kind of reminder to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. And that's kind of the worst thing that an attorney can do, is to let something fall through the cracks. So having a system in place where you prevent that is really critical to having a successful um, to being successful in managing your law office.
Yeah. And I think one other benefit of this, and almost a requirement just under like a malpractice consideration, is having either engagement letters or disengagement letters after that consult. And so to me, it's always a question of, what am I doing between the phases, right? So the gap here and the gap here between phase one and phase two and phase two and phase three is important, because I don't want to drop the ball between phase one and phase two, because that could impact the other phases, right? If I'm not delivering on, hey, we're going to meet. And between phase two and phase three, I need to be clear with the client of what the next step is. They may have met with me, I answered their questions, there's nothing further to do. So I need to let them know that and make sure they understand that there's nothing for us to do as an office right now. If you need us, we're here. But right now, we've had our consult, everything's done, you're not a current client. Then what if they are a client, right? Then you need that engagement agreement in place, or however you're going to handle that, so that they know that they're moving into the next phase of the process. And then you have additional responsibilities, right, as the lawyer, to deliver on that once it becomes an actual case.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. That you make it clear to the caller, the prospective client, where they stand, and I think that provides a little bit of formality to the relationship. That this isn't just a phone call. This is potentially going to establish a an attorney client relationship, and we're going to solve your problem by entering into this attorney client relationship and really being clear to the client about what's next. And I think sometimes that's where if you don't have that system in place of clarifying things to the client actually may be ready to move forward, but you haven't made it clear to the client what to do to take that next step forward. And then that can result in, well, that attorney isn't really paying attention to me. I'm going to take my legal problem and I'm going to take it somewhere else. And so having that system to address what happens next after phase two is really important.
Yeah, and I think mentally I pointed to these gap areas and didn't really show it on the screen, but that's what I always think about is because where the gaps are is where the challenges can come up. It's pretty easy in the moment to have that face to face or phone call with someone and feel like, yeah, we communicated well, that's wonderful. But what happened is next? Like how do we address the area in the gap? And I think once a client actually retains and this becomes a case, now you have a really big important gap because you have to deliver on the services. And this is where lots of lawyers can get into trouble if we're not getting back with the client in a timely manner, we're not meeting expectations. That's a whole another discussion in terms of how to deliver those services competently. But as you look at those gaps, those are where I really want to make sure that my processes are their best because I don't want things to fall down in the midst. So we use here, actually should say Clio Manage in here as well as Clio Grow because that's our practice management system. So once it's in here as a case, then I need to do something with it. I need to make sure that I have, as you mentioned, sort of those case specific things. And we'll use some future episodes to talk about that, I'm sure, in terms of how do we handle certain case types. What's our process when we do bring these folks in to the system to deliver services? And that's a fun discussion because it can take a lot of different turns, but making sure that we deliver and get to that conclusion.
Yep. And phase four conclusion, I think concluding a case can sometimes be dependent upon, of course, the type of case, but also from a mental standpoint, from an attorney standpoint, the way that you structure a fee can sometimes change your motivation as to how to close a case. So maybe you need to take half of the retainer up front, but then the other half, keep it at the end so that you've got a carrot to get at the end, and that'll motivate you, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, to get to a conclusion. But it can be a tempting thing to just leave a file and leave it hanging forever and ever. And you're kind of thinking, well, I'm going to be able to bill against that at some point, but that's not really serving the client to the best of your ability. So, you know, we're we're in it to as a business, of course, and so kind of having that as a motivating factor of maybe you wait to bill at the end or at least a portion at the end that will help you to close cases.
Yeah, that's such a great point because I think there's also going back to what you said before on your connections, like sometimes early in your practice, you have more time to make connections than you do actual cases in the door. And so part of your development of your practice is recognizing that this cycle is going to continue as you build it, and you'll be less inclined to hold these cases because you're not sure where the next one is coming from. And that's a hard thing, especially as you're getting the cycle started because you're not sure where that next case is going to come from. So you may have a little bit of fear about actually doing the conclusion because you don't know what's going to be next.
Right.
And you're constantly fighting that a battle as you work through your practice. And so even after I've been practicing the number of years I've been practicing, that's still a question that comes up. But what you can do is look at your cycle and go, hey, this has worked every year since I've been doing it. You can trust that it will do it again and it will do it again. And if not, you can always go find another job, right?
Well, yeah, but it is. I mean, I think it's a tried and true thing. It's just a matter of doing it, making those connections, doing the work, doing a good job at, what you've been hired to do, and then word of mouth will spread. You'll be able to get more connections. It'll take a few years before those referrals from previous clients start to come in. But if you've done a good job for a client, that's the best referral source that you can have. So making sure that you're bringing cases to a good, proper, timely conclusion is going to help you in the long run. Well, you may be waiting for that. You don't want to quite bill that last $1,000, $2,000. Go ahead and get the work done. Client's going to be happy, and you're more likely to get a referral, in my opinion, based upon that work that you do.
Yeah, and we sometimes struggle with the opposite challenge here in the office where we want to conclude the case before it's actually concluded. Hey,
Yeah,
my part's done, it's out. And then we're going to look for the file and going, oh, it's already in the archive file, but we still have work to do on it. And so that you'll find that in your practice as well. It's like, yep, I'm done. I'm out of here. I got it done and moved on. And no, wait, we still have two or three little things to do, nothing major, right? But just to, okay, we want to go through our after action review. Did we do something unique in this particular case that may apply in future cases? How are we kind of taking advantage of our knowledge management and making things better for the next go around the cycle? What did we learn from that case? Take a few minutes to kind of think, hey, is this a form that I used or created for this case that I could adjust and make available for other types of cases that are similar? Those kind of things where you do a little bit of processing to say, what can we do to really improve that consistency and create checklists around that? So the next time we go through the cycle, it's going to be that much smoother.
yeah, I love that. So just to kind of summarize the core values, you need to identify what your core values are to have, a successful law office. It may be friends, family, faith, a community. I threw a C1 in there, not an F1. But then the phases of the law office life cycle. So phase one is connections, phase two is consults, phase three is cases, and phase four is conclusion. And if you have an understanding of that life cycle of a law office, and then you're able to put some mental effort into planning around those phases, you're going to be set up very well to run a successful law practice.
Yeah, and again, these are things that will continually grow and change as you go, but the big pictures are always there, right? You read any business book, you're going to hear about mission statements and core values and what are you here to do, because that will drive everything else that you do. And then just sort of noticing these patterns that happen and how can you, again, I always look at it as the handoff points. Like, where does it make sense that we kind of have boundaries around this particular area? And so that may be a little different for your office, but this works well for the type of practice that we've done over the years. And hopefully it'll be helpful for somebody else out there who's trying to structure a little bit how they're thinking about their office.
Well, good stuff today, Seth. Thanks for sharing that chart with us. Just to kind of conclude, my name's Thomas Vick. The best way to reach me if you have any questions is vicklaw.org. Vicklaw.org. You can go there and book a call. Seth, how about you? What's the best way for people to reach you?
We are available on the web at adlerattorneys.com. Attorneys.com, and that will get you to our contact us page. You can give us a call or shoot us an email or whatever works best for you.
And remind everybody how they can watch or listen to the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast.
Best way probably is through YouTube and the YouTube channel, and we have the handle at Lifetime Legacy Lawyers, and or you can actually download the audio version of the podcast as well in anywhere that you subscribe to podcasts. So both ways are available. Obviously, the video option is probably a little better for this episode in particular, although that may be a welcome break from seeing the two of us talk at each other. So that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Well, again, good stuff today, and we'll talk to everybody later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Thomas.